In 1942, a 19-year-old seaman climbed down a hatch in the French port of Lorient and stopped being a man with a bed. His place to sleep was the steel space on top of 2 spare torpedoes in the bow room, right up in the nose of the boat, and he shared it with the man on the opposite watch, so the blankets reportedly never went cold. There were 44 men in that hull. It could stay under for 72 hours, and after 5 hours, the air was already going bad long before you understood why. 40,900 men went into the German U-boat service. 28,000 of them never came home. 28,000. Here is the part nobody explains. On a Type 7 boat, one of the 2 toilets was packed to the ceiling with food, and the man who decided how deep the boat went was not the captain. 10 jobs, bottom of the hull to the top. Subscribe, because we are starting where the newest men slept. The matros, the seaman, the lowest rating aboard, who did every job on that boat that did not need a certificate. He stood the bridge watch in Atlantic weather, strapped to the rail so the sea could not take him off it. He passed shells to the deck gun. He scrubbed. And he slept in the bow compartment, in among the reload torpedoes and the torpedo men who serviced them. 2 spare weapons lay above the floor plates in the room where he lived. Until they were fired, his bunk was on top of them, and if they were never fired, he never got the space back. There were no showers. Men walked back down the gangplank in the clothes they had left in. He was also the closest man aboard to the forward escape hatch. Every rung above him on this ladder climbs away from it. The machinist, in the loudest room any of them would ever stand in. 2 diesels for the surface, 2 electric motors for underneath, and a battery pit below the deck plates. He kept all of it turning in a compartment where you could not hear a man shouting beside you. And he lived with a chemistry problem the rest of the crew tried not to think about. Battery cells and seawater do not mix. Let the sea reach the cells and they generate chlorine gas inside a sealed steel tube with nowhere for it to go. That is not theoretical. On April 14, 1945, 8 miles off Peterhead in Scotland, U-1206 flooded through the misuse of its own toilet. Seawater got into the batteries made chlorine, and the commander had nothing left to do except surface into British patrols and scuttle his boat. A submarine killed by its lavatory. The machinist is the only thing standing between that and every other boat in the fleet. The torpedo man who looked after 14 weapons and slept between them. Every one had to be hauled out of its tube every few days, greased, checked, and pushed back. Skip it, and the weapon does not run. And early in the war, the torpedoes did not work anyway. Between 30 and 35% of attacks during the Norwegian campaign failed outright. The depth mechanism ran the weapon about 6 feet below its setting, so it swam under the target and kept going. The magnetic detonators fired early, or not at all. Gunther Prine, the most famous commander in the fleet, fired 8 torpedoes at anchored British transports in April 1940, and every one of them missed. For months, the crews were told the fault was theirs. The improved pistol did not reach the boats until December 1942. 3 years of that war were fought with a weapon the office supplying it could not make work, and the men holding it took the blame. Stand in your kitchen, put both arms out, and turn once. You just used more floor than a U-boat seaman had for an entire patrol. Now, switch the lights off for 4 weeks, with 44 men and 1 door, and never once be alone in a room. The funker, the radio operator, and the reason the crew ever knew what was above them. Submerged, a U-boat is blind. Below periscope depth, there are no windows, no radar, and no horizon. What the boat has instead is a hydrophone array built into the hull. Dozens of listening heads wired back to a single seat, and 1 man in it wearing the headphones. He could give you the bearing of a propeller. He could tell you whether it was a merchant ship or an escort turning toward you, and roughly how fast it was closing. Which is why, when the depth charges started, the whole compartment watched his face. He was the only man aboard with any information at all. Everybody else read the situation off his expression, and he knew it. The bootsman, the bosun, the senior seaman, the man who owned the deck. He ran the seaman. He ran the loading of torpedoes down through the deck hatch in open water, usually in the dark. He decided which man stood which watch. And on a boat where two men share a bunk, that is the same thing as deciding who sleeps. Rank stops being paperwork here. Nobody obeyed a bootsman because of his sleeve. They obeyed him because he had already done every job he was handing out. That is the bottom half of the ladder, and every job on it is about keeping the boat alive. Everything above this line is about deciding what the boat does, and the higher you climb, the fewer men there are left to blame when it goes wrong. The Obersteuermann, the navigator and quartermaster. He fixed the position by sextant and dead reckoning from a platform that spent most of its life underwater and could not see the sky. Get it wrong and the boat misses the convoy or finds the coast, and he ran the provisions. On a Type 7, one of the two toilets was packed to the ceiling with food. Hams and sausages between the forward torpedo tubes, bread in the torpedo room and the motor room. A crew of 44 shared one working lavatory, because the other one was the pantry. The second watch officer, the junior of the two, and the man who ran the boat on the surface at night. A U-boat did most of its killing surfaced, in darkness, running on diesels with the hull nearly invisible against black water. Those were his hours. 4 men on the rail, a quarter of the horizon each, no radar to help them, and a boat that takes half a minute to get under. He owned the deck gun, the anti-aircraft mounting, and the signals traffic. He was usually the youngest officer aboard and the first one his commander tested, because the bridge watch is where one slow decision costs everybody. The first watch officer, the executive officer, second in command, and the man who actually fired. The commander chose the target and called the approach. The first watch officer worked the attack calculator, fed it a range, an angle, and an estimated speed for a ship doing everything possible to be somewhere else, and pressed. Every torpedo the boat sent out went through his hands, which is why the torpedo failures landed on him hardest of anyone. He did the arithmetic. He watched the weapon run straight and true, and nothing happened. And the official explanation was that officers like him could not aim. He was also being trained to replace his commander. A great many of them did. The Leitender Ingenieur, the chief engineer, and after the commander, possibly the most important man on the boat. The man who decided how deep the boat went was not the captain. The commander said, "Dive." The chief engineer decided whether it came back up. He held the trim, the balance of water in the tanks, that lets a submarine sit at a depth instead of falling through it. He ran the crash dive, where men run forward to put their body weight in the bow and the boat goes under in roughly 30 seconds. And he watched the depth gauge on the way down. A Type 7C was rated to about 220 meters. Below that, the hull is being asked a question the shipyard never answered. Rivets weep. The frames start to talk. The chief engineer is the only man aboard who can hear the difference between a boat that is complaining and a boat that is failing, and his job is to say so out loud, in front of the crew, to a commander who does not want to hear it. The commandant, Der Alte, the old man, except he was not old. A commander had to be at least 25 before he was given a boat, and 40 was the usual ceiling. So the men calling him the old man were very often talking about somebody in his middle 20s. He got the name because he was the only person aboard whose decisions nobody could check. He chose the target. He chose whether to surface into an air patrol and charge the batteries, or stay down and let the air go bad. After about 5 hours submerged, the carbon dioxide was at 1.5%. At 2.5%, men stopped being able to think properly. He is the man deciding how long the crew spends between those two numbers, every day for months. And by the end, he was doing it for a service that had already lost. In May 1943, 42 U-boats went out and did not come back. 1,832 men died in that single month. Dönitz pulled all but a token number of boats out of the North Atlantic. The boats kept sailing for 2 more years anyway. That is the whole ladder. 40,900 men went into it. 28,000 never came home, and another 5,000 came home as prisoners, 7 in 10. Not the seamen worse than the officers, not the engine room worse than the bridge. All of them, at roughly the same rate, in the same steel tube, from the boy asleep on the reload torpedoes to Der Alta in his middle 20s. And every man on that ladder was a volunteer. So now you know all 10 stations, and which one the whole compartment stared at when the charges came down. Here is the question, and it has 3 parts. Which station would you have taken, the bow room or the sound room? What year would you have sailed? And would you have gone before May 1943 or after, once everybody already knew the number? Put all 3 in the comments. Like this video. Subscribe, because there is another machine coming. The men on that ladder knew the ODDS by 1943. Most of them went back down the hatch anyway, and nobody has ever really explained why.